There's a particular kind of person who can be standing in the middle of a beautiful evening. Dinner on the table, people laughing, everything exactly as it's supposed to look. And feel, somewhere beneath all of it, that they are not quite there yet. That this isn't it. That the real version of their life, the one that will finally feel like something, is still somewhere ahead. Just around the next corner. After the next thing settles. Once they figure out what they're supposed to be. It's not sadness exactly. It doesn't always look like unhappiness. From the outside, these people often seem fine, functional, even accomplished. They show up, they do the things, they move through the calendar with reasonable efficiency. But there is something underneath all of that motion that feels like stillness. A waiting. A sense that they are living in the ante-room of their own existence, and at some point, when conditions are finally right, the real door will open and they'll step through into their actual life. Most people will never say this out loud because it sounds ungrateful. It sounds like a complaint dressed up as philosophy, and so they carry it quietly. This low-grade suspicion that they are rehearsing something they haven't been called to perform yet, that the present is provisional, that they are living in a long, elaborate almost. If this has ever been true for you, even once, even briefly, this is about that. The common assumption about this feeling is that it's a sign of restlessness or ambition without direction, or some kind of refusal to be grateful for what you have. People around you might have said exactly that. You have so much to be thankful for. Stop living in your head. Just be present, as if the problem was simply a failure of attention, and presence was something you could choose the way you choose a shirt. But the feeling of living in a waiting room isn't a character flaw. It isn't ingratitude or an inability to appreciate what's in front of you. It is a response, a deeply intelligent one, to a life that somewhere along the way taught you that the present was not safe enough to fully inhabit. This was never a flaw. It was a form of protection. What looks like an inability to arrive is actually a very old strategy for survival. When you are young and the present is unpredictable, when the person who was supposed to make you feel safe was sometimes there and sometimes not, or when love felt like something you had to earn rather than something you simply had, you learn to orient toward the future. The future becomes the place where things will finally be okay, where you'll finally be enough, where the waiting will have been worth it. And that orientation, that forward leaning away from the present moment, becomes so practiced, so deeply grooved, that even when circumstances change, the posture remains. You carry it into adulthood without realizing it's still there. You stand in the middle of your life and feel, without fully knowing why, that you are still waiting to arrive. And that is not weakness. That is what happens to a nervous system that learned very early that now was not the place to land. Here is what it actually feels like from the inside, because the inside of this experience is rarely described accurately. It begins as a low hum, a kind of background frequency that runs beneath whatever you are doing. You can be in the middle of something genuinely enjoyable, a trip, a conversation, a meal you are looking forward to, and notice, almost against your will, a faint detachment, like you are watching yourself enjoy it rather than simply enjoying it, like there is a glass wall between you and the moment is on the other side, vivid and perfectly visible, but just slightly out of reach. And then the thought comes, sometimes more as a feeling than a thought. This still isn't it. You find yourself tagging the present as temporary. This job is the stepping stone to the real job. This apartment is where you live until you move somewhere that feels like home. This version of yourself, slightly uncertain, slightly waiting, is the draft before the final version appears. There is a future self you carry around in your mind, someone who has it together, someone who is finally at peace, Someone who woke up one morning and felt unmistakably that they had arrived. And you are always a few steps behind that person, always almost catching up, always watching them recede just as you think you're closing the distance. This makes certain things very difficult. Rest, for instance, because resting feels like stopping, and stopping feels dangerous when you haven't arrived yet. If you pause for too long, you might miss the moment when things open up, and so even your stillness is tinged with readiness, a kind of low-level vigilance that never fully powers down. You sit on your couch and your body is there, but some part of your attention is trained on the future, scanning it the way you'd scan a crowd for someone you're supposed to meet. And what makes this harder is that the present keeps happening anyway, keeps insisting on itself, while you're oriented somewhere else. Whole seasons go by and you find yourself thinking, I'll feel it when I get there, when things settle, when I'm ready. You keep meaning to be more present. You keep resolving to inhabit your life more fully, but the resolution comes from the same mind that is doing the waiting. And so it becomes one more thing on the list of things that will happen once the real life begins. There is also a loneliness particular to this experience, and it is worth naming slowly. You can be surrounded by people who love you, genuinely love you, and still feel like you're not quite meeting them. Not because you don't want to, but because full presence, real contact, real arrival in a moment feels like something you're not sure you know how to do. You have been so practiced at half being here that full being here feels unfamiliar, almost unsteady on its feet. You reach toward it and something in you retreats, not on purpose, just by habit, just because the body that learned to wait hasn't yet been told that the waiting is allowed to stop. And underneath all of it, running quiet like water under ice, there is sometimes a grief that is hard to name, a mourning for the time already past while you were waiting for it to become your real life, the years that moved through you while you were oriented somewhere else, the moments you were physically present for, but somewhere else in everything that matters. Somewhere in the almost, in the not yet, in the version of your life that was always just ahead of where you actually were. You were here the whole time. You just didn't always know it was enough. Here is where it gets complicated, and where it deserves to be held with care rather than resolved too quickly. Because understanding this about yourself doesn't automatically change it. You can recognize every word of what's been said here. You can feel the full weight of it land, and still find yourself tonight back in the waiting room. That's not failure. That is the nature of a pattern that was laid down before you had language for it, before you had any choice in the matter. Knowing the name of the room doesn't always unlock the door, and there is real grief in that, a specific, unhurried grief for the child who learned to hold the present at arm's length because the present kept disappointing them. For every version of yourself that was fully here and didn't know it, didn't let themselves feel it, because you were already leaning toward what came next. For all the arriving you have already done that didn't register as arriving, because the destination kept relocating itself just past wherever you were standing. None of that can be undone. The years are not retrievable. The moments that passed while you were waiting for the real ones don't come back with more presence in them. And sitting with that truth is not something to rush through. It is something to move through slowly, and with exactly the kind of gentleness you would offer someone else who was carrying the same weight. You wouldn't tell them to just get over it. You wouldn't tell them they were wasting their sadness, so the same rule applies here. What makes this harder still is that the world doesn't help. A culture that is always telling you to optimize, to level up, to build toward the next thing. That culture is structurally built for the waiting room. It rewards future orientation. It calls it ambition. It dresses the pattern up in productivity language and tells you this is how you're supposed to move through a life. And so, the pull toward the next milestone, the next version of yourself, doesn't only come from inside you. It comes from everywhere around you too. and it can be nearly impossible to tell where the external pressure ends and the old wound begins. There is also the question of identity that rarely gets acknowledged. If the waiting room has been your primary experience of being yourself, if feeling like you're almost there but not quite is the most familiar sensation you know, then the question of what comes after the waiting can feel genuinely disorienting. Not the relief you might expect. Because the waiting, as painful as it is also known. And known has a gravity of its own, even when it hurts. Even when you've been ready to leave for years. The silence of a person who carries this, who has always waited and waits still, is not emptiness. It is the most complicated kind of fullness, full of everything deferred, everything almost touched, everything loved at a careful remove. That is not nothing. That took something quiet and significant to carry. What begins to shift, and it shifts slowly and not in a straight line, and sometimes it shifts and then unshifts, and that is allowed, is the relationship to right now. Not the present as a destination you're trying to reach, not presence as a performance of having finally arrived, but the present as simply this, here. The ordinary, imperfect, not yet figured out texture of the moment you're actually in. It begins, sometimes, with very small things. A cup of coffee that is just a cup of coffee. A walk that doesn't have to mean anything. A moment where you notice that you are here, in this body, in this particular light, in this specific version of your one irrepeatable life. And instead of immediately tagging it as provisional, you let yourself be on the same side of the glass as it. Just briefly, just once, not as a practice, not as a technique, just as a quiet accident of presence. That is not arrival, it is not a cure, but it is something the waiting room cannot offer. Contact. Actual contact with the actual texture of your actual life. And over time, those small moments of accidental contact accumulate into something that begins to feel, tentatively and without fanfare, like home. And here is what is quietly remarkable about people who have lived so long in anticipation. When they do finally touch the present, even partially, even briefly, they touch it with an attention that is rare, because they have spent so long just outside the glass, watching the moment with the intensity of someone who has been waiting to enter it for years. When they arrive, they notice things, the quality of the light, the particular way a laugh sounds, the exact weight of a hand placed gently on an arm, not in spite of the waiting, but because of it. The waiting made them watchers, and the watchers, when they finally step inside, see more than most. The life that felt like a waiting room was still a life. The years spent leaning forward were still full of texture and meaning, even if that meaning is only legible in retrospect. And the part of you that held the present at a careful distance was not abandoning your life. It was doing the only thing it knew how to do, keeping you intact until something changed. Something is changing, slowly, in the direction of here. If any of this found you somewhere true tonight, if the waiting room is a place you know well, or a place you are only just learning you've been living in, tell me in the comments. What is it you've been waiting for your life to become? I want to know what it looks like from where you're standing. Still here. The door was always open.